I'm sure you've heard of a situation where people die in their homes and they're discovered weeks later. And then everyone's shocked. Like neighbors are like, damn, like I didn't see that coming. And not to get too morbid here, but mostly it's because they notice flies at the windows, maybe a smell or something. And, the mailbox piling out or something like that. So when you think about it, it's not that surprising when you see articles like this from The Conversation. Sweden sees sharp rise in burials without ceremony. The number of people who bury their dead relatives without any official ceremony is increasing rapidly in Sweden, up from less than 2% a decade ago to 8% this year. In many cities, the bodies of about 1 in 10 deceased people are transferred directly from the hospital to a crematorium, with the ashes often scattered or buried by staff in anonymous memorial parks. Now, when we look at my country, Belgium has 17 crematoria. Cremations are carried out in almost 60% of deaths. Now, if we go look to more secular countries like the Netherlands, for instance, you've got 93 crematoria, and you've got, well, it's not that much more than Belgium, 63% of deaths, people are cremated. If you go look at Sweden has, 10 million people? So a bit less than Belgium. Sweden has 59 crematoria, and 80% of people who die are cremated. Now that's really a really high number, right? It seems only Switzerland has a little bit more. Like if you're just comparing the Western countries like Europe and United States and stuff like that, it seems Switzerland has the highest. Now, according to the Swedish Funeral Home Association, which released the data, such burials are extremely rare in other countries, although according to new data from the UK's largest funeral director, they are also on the rise in the UK, with 1 in 25 funerals being direct cremations, perhaps inspired by the late musician David Bowie. One explanation for their popularity in Sweden could be that it is one of the most secular countries in the world and often resists tradition. But with the majority of young people in 12 European countries reporting they have no faith, could it take off elsewhere too? And does it mean that rituals in general are on their way out? Now, the tradition part is very true. We know Sweden is also part of the black metal scene. I think it originated in Norway, which is also pretty secular, I believe. So the black metal scene is very notorious for their church burnings and, anti-authority kind of rhetoric. It was pretty much a reaction to the quote-unquote invading of Christianity back in the day. And, they're not having this, this guy in Rome tell them what to do, tell them how to think. And I think that mentality is pretty much alive still in Scandinavia. In Sweden, the number of regular churchgoers has been declining for some time and continues to do so. It seems like traditional church rituals don't attract modern secular people who may experience them as meaningless. Take weddings. Traditional church ceremonies are reliable if you accept and follow the rules and the authority of the ceremonial leader. The marriage will be established, but such rituals are often experienced as formal practices and lacking in personal touches. While some wedding couples still get married in church, often for aesthetic and historical reasons, the majority of Swedes today opt for non-religious weddings. This can sometimes be in nature or in more spectacular places. Funerals have been changing for some time. While the majority of funerals are still carried out by the church, some opt for non-religious ceremonies. In many Western countries today, pop songs or ballads that the deceased loved are often played rather than traditional religious hymns. A historical popular Swedish funeral song was based on the image of heaven as a town above the clouds with beaches drowned in sunshine. But that message doesn't appeal to the modern person. Non-religious people don't pin their hopes on an afterlife. It is the life here and now that must be fulfilled. Clearly, the rise of secularism is linked to a rise in individualism. In the absence of a god or an afterlife, we and the now become increasingly important. So just as we can see in both weddings and funerals, modern rituals focus increasingly on the individual. For example, in Sweden, the celebration of A-level graduation, high school, is becoming an increasingly important ritual. Non-religious naming ceremonies for babies are also becoming more popular, at the expense of traditional baptism. In 2000, 72% of Swedish babies were baptized, compared to 42% in 2010. Now, I think this shift to individualism is a bit problematic. I think there should be a healthy mix between individualism and collectivism. I think if you tilt it to one side too much, I don't think that's a good thing. I think that's bad for society. Too much collectivism will end up infringing on people's rights, and too much individualism, will make people live on their own, don't care for anyone else, become more narcissistic and stuff like that. I think there should definitely be more solidarity among people right now, especially when you know that Sweden, for instance, is a very socialist country, very expensive healthcare system, which must be maintained. So obviously you've got to have people working, and this includes women. And I believe I was reading a book about socialism a few weeks ago, and it said 50% of women were working in the 1960s, and it even went to 75%, I believe, in the 1980s. So, I mean, that's good, I guess, but it also has other effects, like people are always working. If they're even having families, they're busy with their children. They don't have time for neighbors. And with the smartphone generation, as I like to call it, don't be surprised if something happens to someone in your area and you didn't notice, right? They go on to say, with these new individual-centered rituals focusing on the present life rather than the hereafter, it is not surprising that many Swedes are buried without any ceremony. I don't agree with that statement, because you'd think if people are secular and they don't believe in a hereafter, you think they would do anything to put, a lot of effort into this last thing you can do for a friend or a relative, so they can be remembered. People will say, wow, this was such a great person, like, oh wow, he volunteered for that, and oh, nice music he listened to, and stuff like that. So I don't agree with that statement. I don't really get why they put it in there, but okay. There are often requests for the ashes to be spread in places that the deceased had been connected to, like the sea. In many of these cases, the deceased had requested such a burial, sometimes because they didn't want to create extra work for their relatives. In other cases, it is a financial decision, or the relatives could not agree on what ceremony ought to be used. Sometimes there are no relatives. Sweden has the highest number of people living alone in the world. And that's also something that has changed in society, like people worrying about, oh, I don't want to create extra work for my relatives, or I don't want to bother them with my funeral, the last thing you can do for someone. I think that's sad, to be honest. I can completely agree if you don't have the financial resources, of course, but if you do, and this is a very important person to you, like, I don't see why you shouldn't be able to, or wouldn't want to invest that money or time or whatever. That's something that's changed as well, because let's say in the 1960s, people didn't think twice about that kind of stuff, right? And with them saying, Sweden has the highest number of people living alone, like, something has gone wrong somewhere. Even if you have friends, even if you have relatives, there has been some kind of disconnection from them. And I see this in my personal life as well. I have big families on both sides, but it's not what it used to be. Let's keep it at that. And I don't like the the argument of, oh, but we have to work more, this, that, I think if you truly care about people, you will make time, right? Even if you work a lot, you will make time. They continue to say, but how likely is it that this type of funeral will become standard practice in Sweden or elsewhere? It's probably unlikely to happen anytime soon. Many mourners feel the need to mark the end of a life somehow, something that fits with individualism too. That said, it is likely that non-religious funerals and private ceremonies will become more common than traditional funerals in increasingly secular countries in the years to come. And that's all I'm gonna read. I just want to say, after you watch this video, if you have any neighbors or, even relatives you don't talk to, go up to them, go to their front door, be like, hey, how are you? Make that connection, right? Look out for them because you might need them as well. It's not just, you having to look out for them. It's them also, thinking, oh, wow, this person cares. I'm gonna look out for them as well. Because people can't live without other people. Like, it doesn't work. Well, as far as I know, anyway. Maybe if you're like a hermit or something up in the mountains, maybe it works. But mostly, for the most part, it doesn't work, right? So I'd recommend you do that. Make that connection. That will be it for this video. This is my first video of this kind. I hope I'll be able to do more stuff like this. I will be investing in a camera soon. I'm still saving up for that. I hope you enjoyed for now, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.